Greetings, fellow woodworkers and makers of great things. Welcome to my shop. Today I'm going to talk to you about rough sawn lumber and the differences between rough saw lumber and the surfaced lumber that you can buy at the home center or local lumber yard. And it may be S4S, surface 4 size, or S2S, surfaced on 2 sides. But either way, it's been pre-milled before you get it, and pretty much it is what it is. On the other hand, rough sawn lumber is milled to full thickness, full width. It's not going to be planed or smooth in any direction. That's your job. But the big difference is it's going to be thicker from the start. It's going to give you the ability to dimension it the way you want to dimension it. But most importantly, it gives you the ability to mill your lumber true and straight to the surfaces you want, as opposed to just taking what the surface 4 side lumber gives you. And that's a big advancement. You know, most of you more experienced woodworkers are familiar with this concept. You've been doing it for years, and I get that. But this was a transitional thing for me, and I'm hoping some of the newer and intermediate woodworkers can kind of up their game a little bit by understanding how to work with rough lumber and gain, you know, really better results. If you've got a jointer and a planer, or if you're thinking of getting a jointer and a planer, then this is for you. So let's take a look at it. Let's see what we do with that stock and how we mill it once we understand what we want to do with that stock to get the best pieces possible for our furniture. All right, so hang in there, stay with me, come join me. Let's take a look at this. Let's talk for a minute about rough sawn versus surfaced material that you can buy. All right, rough sawn material comes in increments of 1/4 of an inch. So a 1-inch rough sawn board is what is called 4/4. A 4/4 board is going to look a lot like this. It is not planed. It is not surfaced. It's not necessarily true. It comes out of the mill at about 1 inch thick. Often a little thicker. They usually leave you a little room on a rough sawn board, whereas a surfaced 4 side board, or surfaced 2 sides if we're just talking about these faces, that came off the mill looking exactly like this, but as part of the milling process they flattened it and surfaced it and brought it down to something that you can work with right off the shelf. And so what you have here on this 4/4 board, surface 4 sides, let's see if we get a measurement on that. That's right at 1 inch and a strong 1/8. Let's say 1 inch and 1/8. This one used to be 1 inch or 1 inch and 1/8, but in the surfacing process, they brought it down to exactly 3/4. So you've got 3/4 to work with here, and you got a little more than 4/4 to work with here. So, you know, what's the difference? I'm probably going to take this and plane it down anyway, and get it into something more like this. So why shouldn't I buy it surfaced already and save myself a lot of time? Well, there's a good reason for that. Wood moves. So even though this board has been surfaced on 4 sides, it has not stayed flat through the processing, the shipping, and the transportation and climate change and everything else. So this board is by no means, you know, a flat board. Let's see if we can get a look down this way, and I think you can see that this board is bowing in this direction. Right? So this board can't be used at its full length. You might be able to cut it down and get some flatter pieces, but if you were to mill this, let's see if we can get an idea of how much we'd have to take out of this board to get it somewhere near flat. So where this board is most bowed, we've got 1/8 of an inch of bow in this board. So if we needed to use this board in its full length, how can you do that? You would have to plane, you'd have to joint a face straight, which means we're going to lose an eighth, all right? So we'll lose an eighth on this side as we, flatten one side, but that would still leave us a hump on the other side that we'd have to take off. We'd lose another eighth. So we'd lose a quarter of an inch, and the best we could do with this board would be a 1/2 inch thick board. So this board becomes drawer sides, or if you're going to use a piece of it like this, right, obviously the bow from here to just here is relatively insignificant. You could probably get that out and still leave yourself with a fairly thick board that you can use. The difference with the 4/4 stock is I've got a lot of material on this that I could plane and joint and still come up with a very stable board. And that's what I like to do. I like to buy my wood in the rough, 5/4, 6/4, 8/4, whatever dimension you need. And then I can take the boards out of here that I want and mill them to the proper thickness for the parts I need for my furniture, and know that I've got straight and stable and true parts, because that's going to haunt you when you start having to glue things up or cut joinery or look at a finished piece and not want it to be a little bit wonky or torqued or pulling in different areas. So that's the difference between surface four side versus rough sawn lumber. And if you're getting into this craft and you're starting to get more serious about your work and what it's going to look like, I encourage you to start with rough stock. Take that extra thickness, mill it. I'm going to talk a little bit about why you have to mill your parts out of here carefully. This board's going to move when we cut it, so we want to cut it a little long or a little thick or a little wide, and we want to let it settle, find out where it wants to go, and then we'll mill it to the final dimension and come up with something that's really stable. All right. Surface four side, you can get that at the box stores. You can get that virtually any place. Rough sawn lumber, you're going to have to find a hardwood supplier or a sawmill in your area that sells wood in this way, and they're out there, right? And, they're out there. Sometimes you got to drive a little bit for it, depending on the quality and the species that you want. Call ahead. This happens to be quarter sawn cherry, which is very stable anyway. But I had to call around to find this. Everybody's not going to have, quarter sawn cherry. They're all going to have cherry, but you might have to look around. So if you're interested in finding this stuff, Google sawmill, Google hardwood supplier, and you'll probably find a couple of places within an hour of you or so that you can grab this stuff. If you saw my video on selecting stock that went out a few weeks ago, I talked about where we get the pieces of material for our build and why we're going to take the leg stock from this rift sawn material right here, and that's going to give us relatively straight grain on all four sides of the legs. We won't see any cathedrals in the leg. So what we want to do is rough saw this out of this this bigger piece, and if I measure the width, this is rough sawn, so it's going to have to be planed all around, but our maximum width here is just shy of 2 1/4. Check it in the middle. That's a full 2 1/4, and down here it's a little chewed up, but we can get it. Yeah, so we're pretty steady 2 1/4 all the way throughout this board. So we want to cut. We want to rip it here. We want to rip this out at a little more than 2 1/4 because we're going to have to joint an end and then rip an end. So I think I'm going to go 2 3/8 would be a good way to go. But I want to make sure I take it from the shortest part of the board. So let's take a look at this board. Get a straight edge on it. And this is a 1 millimeter setup block, and we want to see if we've got any deviation. Obviously a little bit at the end there. Any deviation, there's a little bit, there's a little check there. This is pretty low from here to here. Let me get some chalk. I think that's going to wind up being our spot. So I said from here to about here. What I'm measuring is that the board is dipping there. And we're good the rest of the way down. So when I say I want to get 2 3/8 inches, I want to get 2 3/8 inches from this spot right here, because if I take 2 3/8 inches from the end and run it across, I'm going to be lower here. All right. So let's measure that out. Okay, so finding a place that is 2 3/8 in the middle of my low spot, and that's going to be 1 2 3/8 right here. And then I'm going to go down this end to 2 3/8. I'm going to add a 1/16. I'm going to go down here, 2 3/8, add a 1/16. And if I connect these two lines with the extra 1/16 of an inch on them, I should be able to clear that low spot. Let's get that line. Get this line, and I am clearing my low spot there. I know you can't see that. You just gotta trust me. And there's my mark that I want to cut this on. We're not going to run it through the table saw, and the reason we're not going to run it through a table saw is because I would have to joint this end, and if I joint this end and then rip it, I'm going to have to joint that end again and maybe again, and then keep making rips. So imagine if you joint this end now so you can get a table saw cut on this. Well, I'd also have to surface plane one face. The reason I'm not doing that is because when I cut this piece out, and I'll use the bandsaw, just follow that line. When I cut this piece out, it's going to move, right? This board is under tension and pressure, and so if I was to joint this edge right here and then rip this piece out, there's a good chance it's going to move some. All right, it's wood is like think of this piece of wood as you sitting on a bus with somebody next to you, right? And you're kind of in there, and it's a long ride, and that person finally gets up and leaves, and you go, ah, and you got a little stretch, a little room. That's what's going to happen to this board when I separate it from the rest of the wood. So we want this board to be separated from the rest of the wood. Then we can let it sit for a day or so, go where it wants to go. Then we can start doing the milling work to get this thing true and square and straight. So that's the plan. Let's get the bandsaw set up, and we'll see if we can't hold that line. All right, guys, we're not using a fence here. We're just gonna freehand this on that chalk line that I made, and just keep it as straight as we can. So let's get this thing fired up. I got an outfeed roller on the other end. Keep me supported. Get on the dust collector. got to wobbling a little bit. In the middle of that line it was faint, and I don't know if you can tell from the angle, but the blade was blowing away the chalk on the line, and I was trying to aim about an inch behind me, so it was a little tricky. But I think we're good. That's why, again, while we go a little long, we're going to have to joint this edge. But you can see we've got some pretty straight grain running down this this side of the board. We've got pretty straight grain running down this side, and of course the rest of it is fairly straight grain as well. So we should get some nice legs out of this. Now I've got to do the same thing with another piece, and I've got to rip the rift sawn off of that. I'll spare you that because it's going to be the same exact process. With the leg stock cut out, roughed out, the next thing to do is just let it sit. So I've got it stickered on the bench. Just give it some time to breathe, overnight at least. My experience is that most of the wood movement that's going to happen happens right off the saw. And you've all seen kerfs open or close just as you're ripping a piece. So most of the movement, I believe, happens when the saw is cut. The next biggest chunk of movement happens within an hour or two, and by overnight you're pretty good. I mean, if you can wait a week, that's nice. But this wood was all acclimated to the shop for a good 3 weeks. So it's been in here at 58 to 62 degrees. What do we got? 38, 40% relative humidity, and it's been sitting like that for 3 weeks. So it's pretty good. We'll let it stabilize, and we'll come back to it tomorrow and start turning it into legs. So I'm at the joiner with one of my pieces, and what I'm going to do is joint one face perfectly flat down here, and then once I get that jointed, I'm going to turn this jointed against the fence and plane another side 90 degrees to that. And it's going to get noisy here in a minute, so that's why I want to explain it first. All right, let's get things turned up. Notice here that I'm referencing the previously jointed face against the fence of the joiner, not the bed of the joiner. And if you could see, the furthest edge on the bottom is actually riding above the bed until we join enough off to start squaring that up to the previously jointed side. And you'll see that after a couple of passes, there's enough of a flat on the bottom that the board will run itself straight. You don't have to put as much pressure against the fence to keep everything going. First step on the joiner was to make this edge perfectly true, and we accomplished that. Once I did that, I turned this true piece against the fence, and I rode the fence and joined this piece exactly 90 degrees to the part that I jointed first. And we've got a nice, now we've got a nice square reference edge against each other. And what we'll do is take that to the table. So before I do, I always like to mark that square portion. So as I'm moving boards through the table saw, I make sure that I have the right one referenced, and I'll show you how I do that when we go to the table saw. But first things first, I've got to do the same exact process on the other 3 legs. So let's get on it. All right, now that all 4 legs have a square reference on here, we can rip them to width. Now, the thinnest dimension I have on any of these after all that jointing work is 1 7/8 inches. So I've got the saw blade set to 1 7/8 inches so I can get them the same size in the other dimension. Notice how I'm positioning the board on the table saw. Because I'm square here, I'm flat against the table, I'm flat against the fence. You do not want to do this on a non-square edge because you'll be rocking and rolling as you go through the blade, and that's dangerous. So let's get these ripped to size. At this point at the surface planer, I've already made 2 or 3 passes on each of the legs, and this is the final pass. I'm only taking off a very small amount, maybe a 1/64 of an inch on each pass. And what I'm doing is I'm running the leg through on one surface, then rotating it 90 degrees to another surface, and running it again at the same exact setting. I'm never moving the head of the planer. Therefore, I know I'm square in all dimensions, and each of the 4 legs will be square to each other. In between, I'm examining the boards. I'm taking a look to make sure that I'm planing the side I want to plane, if there's any saw marks or small defects. Well, here we have our finished leg blanks, and they're all exactly the same dimension. They'll obviously need to be cut to length and get some mortises, some joinery done on them. In the end, we came out to 1 13/16 of an inch. So that's more than 1 3/4, but less than the 1 7/8 that was my my hope. But you know, the material gives you what the material gives you. There were some, you know, blemishes in there and stuff, so I just planed until I had 4 decent surfaces on every piece of leg stock. And you know, had I stopped sooner, I would have left some defects I didn't want to show. So it is what it is. Like I said, the wood gives you what the wood gives you. But starting with rough sawn stock was the key to getting you know, as big a leg as I could get for this table from 8/4 stock. So I'm going to go on with this cherry desk build. I'm not going to take you through the whole thing. The next step is going to be, you know, gluing up a top, cutting mortise and tendons for the legs. You guys have seen that already. I've got videos on it. I'll take you back in. If I come across something I think is interesting, I'll bring you back in. But so that's it for this video. Hey, thank you everybody for watching. If you enjoyed this, please give it a like. Like I always say, if you're a subscriber already, thank you, I appreciate you. If you're not, think about it. Subscribing helps the channel, and helping the channel helps me, so give it a thought. All right, folks, see you in the shop.